In this lesson, I'm covering another little advanced feature of your DSLR called the histogram. I mentioned this earlier in the class because there was a setting in the menu about it, but it's basically a way to visually represent the exposure of your image. The easiest way to do this is to look at it, so either take out your camera or just watch the video. And if you go to live preview mode, and then press the info button to change the display. Or if your camera doesn't have an info button, press the display button, and there's potentially a chance that your camera doesn't have a histogram, but if it does, you'll just scroll through the info or display settings to see it. So once I get to this image with the little graph right here, you can see a rectangle with, looks like some peaks, some white peaks. Watch what happens when I increase or decrease the shutter speed, which is actually going to adjust the brightness or the darkness of this image. So let me also set my ISO to 100 so it's fixed, so the camera isn't trying to auto expose. So just with the shutter speed, that's the only setting that's changing now. See how those peaks within the histogram are moving to the left or right? When it goes to the left side of the rectangle, it's when the image is actually becoming darker. And vice versa, it goes to the right side of the histogram when it gets brighter. That's because the histogram is a scale that goes from darks to brights, or complete black to complete pure white. So if anything is hitting that left side, it means it's completely black. There's zero exposure whatsoever. There's zero information being captured if I took that picture. Let me go ahead and do one of those like that, where we have some actually touching the left side. All right, now let's go all the way to the other side, where some of the parts of the image are actually touching the right-hand side. So those peaks are actually the parts of the image. So let's scroll down where the peaks are somewhat in the middle. That's kind of what you want. You want a picture that has exposures across the board. And that's what the histogram represents. If you have a peak or multiple peaks from black all the way to pure white. So sometimes you're not going to have complete black to complete pure white, but in general, you should have something throughout the middle. So if I take that picture, you see it's in the middle and it's well exposed. It's also well exposed if I look at my exposure meter at the bottom of the live preview as well. We can also review our photos and see what it looks like. So if we press the review button, and then again, if you press the info button or the display button and cycle through the views, you can get to this one that shows the histogram. This one's a little bit easier. So let's go with just one photo at a time. This is the last one, well exposed. This one's too bright. The other thing this does is cool on this camera. It actually, see how this is flashing white? That's telling us that that part of the image is completely pure white. There's no information whatsoever. It's overexposed, and if we tried to edit it and bring it back and expose it properly in editing, it's not going to work. Now this one, here's the dark one with the histogram showing a lot of the image to the left side of the histogram, and that makes sense because the image is super, super dark. All right, so like anything, the histogram is meant to be a tool that helps you. There's no rules that are meant to be broken with photography. Just like with the exposure meter, I told you that it's okay if it's a little bit dark or a little bit bright. If you have a histogram that's all black, all on the left-hand side, but a little bit on the right-hand side, maybe you're taking a photo of everything being silhouetted, looking through a dark hallway, and then at the very end of the hallway is a little bit of light. Or maybe you're outside, you're on a beach, and everything is bright and sunny except for a shadow or a little lifeguard tower or something like that. that would be a histogram with everything a little bit that looks a little too bright and then a little bit in the middle or in the darks. So you use it as a tool, but not necessarily a rule. All right, if you have any questions about histograms, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next lesson. Bye. In this section, we're going to look at the video recording mode of your DSLR. So on a Canon T7i, to change to the video mode, you just click it on and then go past the on button to the video mode. Other DSLRs will have a little switch here next to the live preview button or a specific record button. We also see here this has a little red dot, which signifies that that's the button that we're going to press to actually record video. So when we're in this mode, you already see that the live preview is on, and that's just the way that with this camera, it's going to want you to shoot your video. So really, if you just start recording, if you just click this button, you're just gonna start recording and you can just kind of go and start making your movies. There are a couple settings though in the menu that you might want to look at before you start shooting video. So if we click the menu button, you'll notice that the main menu is actually a little bit different for the video feature. So the first camera setup menu has what's called the movie record size. So if we go into that menu, you have several options. Pay attention to a couple numbers. The first is this first sort of number under movie record size. Right now it's set to 1920 by 1080. That's the size of your video. So that's the pixel size, 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall. That's standard HD video. So most DSLR cameras, pretty much any of them now, can shoot 1080 HD video. Some of them can shoot even higher at like 2K or 4K, and by the time you're watching this, maybe 8K or beyond. But it depends on your camera. So if you don't see these exact options, don't worry, it's just that your camera is a little different. The next number is the frames per second. Here we're set to 29.97 frames per second. So in the old film days, what this would mean is that for every second of film, the camera is actually taking 30 images or 30 frames. Now digitally, it's a little bit different in the way that it actually takes it. It's not like it's taking 30 frames or 29.97 pictures and stitching it together. It's all digital, but it's still going to have that same effect of that many frames per image, or per second rather. The more frames per second, the smoother the motion's going to be, but the fewer frames per second, the more stuttery or jittery it's going to be, beyond if you go lower than 24 frames per second. And 24 frames per second, I know we're going down a little rabbit hole right now, but I think it's important to know, 24 frames per second is the standard sort of film look. So if you watch an old film that's shot on actual film, it's most likely going to be shot at 24 frames per second. And that's just a very nice, pleasing look. And if you get a little bit faster, like 30 frames per second, that might look a little bit more like a television look, or even 60 frames per second, or the close equivalent of 59.94. That's going to look even more smooth, more television-like. They shoot a lot of sports and fast-paced motion with those higher frames per second. So again, this isn't a real class on how you shoot videos, but I did want to just explain what those numbers meant. And so you can change it. So here we have different options. So we have 59.94 frames per second, so that's close to 60. So if you are shooting something that's a little faster motion, or if you want to slow it down later on and make it slow-mo, you might want to choose a higher FPS. We also have a 1280 by 720 version on this camera, so that's a little bit smaller of a frame. It's still technically HD, but it's not full HD quality. I don't know why you would choose that. It takes up less memory space, but if you're shooting video, I would definitely recommend shooting 1920 by 1080. If I were shooting video, I would choose this last option. 1920 by 1080, 23.98 FPS. That's going to be the most cinematic looking video that you can capture with this specific camera. If you're shooting with another DSLR that has higher qualities, like 4K, I would choose that, but still shoot in the 23.98 FPS. That's just my preference. Just do some test shots. Go film something that's moving, running around, cars moving by, and watch those video clips in a large monitor, Some people can't even tell the difference. I personally like 2398. So that's really the main setting that you want to look at before you start shooting video. In the next lessons, we're going to look at a couple other options for recording audio internally with your DSLR and adding an external microphone to make it sound even better. See you there. One thing that DSLRs don't do good in terms of video is recording audio internally. So every DSLR camera should have an internal microphone, and it's going to record audio, but it's not going to sound great. So especially if you're recording like people talking, doing any sort of interviews, anything where you want to really be able to hear what's happening, I would use an external microphone. That being said, either way, I want to show you the option for setting up these audio levels. So if you go into your main video menu, you go down to sound recording, go in that menu, you can turn it from auto, which means it's going to automatically try to judge what the levels are and record at a proper level, and you could change it to manual. And then you can go down to the record level, go into that menu, and then go left or right. You can use the touch screen here, and it's going to make the recording level higher or lower. If you're just using the internal microphone, it might be worth just setting it to auto. If you're going to use an external microphone, you'll probably want to use the settings, and we'll see that in the next video. The next setting under here is the wind filter. So it can automatically try to prevent wind noise, and the DSLR microphones get a lot of wind noise just from motion of the camera, you walking, or actual wind. So I would have that on. Also in the wind filter menu, you saw the attenuator. This is a way to decrease the recording level. This would be if you were using an external microphone as well that is recording and it's too loud, and if it's being distorted, then you might want to add or enable that option. So that's how you manually control the audio levels. When you're looking at that level right here, you see that there's these bars that go from -40 dB to 0 dB. And then here you see a green dot under -12 dB. That's really where you want your levels to be bouncing. So if I turn this back to auto, and you can see I can actually disable it as well. You see that it's bouncing around, and the white dots are going up to about -12, which is exactly where we would actually want it to be recording. So in a quiet environment like this, the auto feature works pretty well, but when you're outside, there's honking cars, there's loud noises that you aren't going to be prepared for, and there's also dialogue and people talking. It might be a better idea to use the manual settings, but make sure you're trying to get the levels to bounce around that -12 mark when someone's speaking or whatever, with whatever sound you're trying to capture. All right, we'll see you in the next lesson when we add an external microphone to this camera.